In today's story, you'll hear how one small lie to a teacher quickly turned into a funny, stressful, and unforgettable lesson about honesty. It's a story about mistakes, consequences, and the surprising kindness that can come when we least expect it. It all started on a cold Monday morning, the kind of morning when you wake up and instantly regret every life decision that led you to this exact moment. My alarm had gone off 3 times already, and I was still buried under my blanket, pretending that time had somehow stopped. Of course, it hadn't. My English literature class began at 8:30, and by the time I finally looked at the clock, it was 8:27. Panic hit me like a wave. I jumped out of bed, pulled on whatever clothes I could find, and sprinted out of the house without breakfast. I looked like a character from a movie running in slow motion, except there was nothing heroic about it. When I finally reached the classroom, out of breath and red-faced, the teacher had already started the lesson. Mrs. Brown, my English teacher, was not the type of person you wanted to upset. She was strict, sharp, and had this strange ability to sense lies before you even said them. But that morning, for some reason, I thought I could outsmart her. "Good morning," I said, trying to catch my breath. "I'm so sorry I'm late. My bus broke down." It sounded believable, at least to me. I expected her to just nod and move on. But she paused, lowered her glasses slightly, and looked right at me. "Your bus broke down?" she repeated slowly, as if testing every syllable. "Yes, it was terrible," I said, my voice trembling slightly. "We were stuck for 20 minutes. I thought the lie was over. I thought I'd gotten away with it. But then, something unexpected happened." She smiled, and that was terrifying. Mrs. Brown never smiled unless she was about to make a point. "That's quite unlucky," she said softly, "because I drove behind your bus this morning, and it seemed perfectly fine." My heart stopped. My mouth went dry. My brain froze. I could almost hear the sound of my own lie collapsing in slow motion. Everyone in the class turned to look at me. I felt like I was standing on a stage with a spotlight on my face and no lines left to say. My best friend Emma was sitting 2 rows behind me, silently mouthing, "Asterisk, you're doomed, asterisk." I gave a nervous laugh and said, "Ah, maybe it started working again." "Right after you passed it?" Mrs. Brown didn't respond. She just looked at me with that calm, unreadable expression that made you question every decision you'd ever made. Then she simply said, "We'll talk after class." And in that moment, I realized something. One small, harmless lie had just turned into a ticking time bomb. But of course, I had no idea that things were about to get much, much worse. The rest of the class felt like the longest hour of my life. I couldn't focus on a single word Mrs. Brown was saying. My heart was pounding, my palms were sweaty, and I kept imagining all the possible ways she could punish me. Maybe detention? Maybe she'd call my parents? Or worse, maybe she'd make me read my essay aloud in front of everyone again. That had happened once, and it was pure torture. But then something strange happened. Instead of being angry, Mrs. Brown acted completely normal. She went on teaching, reading lines from Romeo and Juliet, and even asked questions to other students. I thought maybe, just maybe, she had forgotten about the whole thing. Halfway through the class, my confidence returned. I started to relax, even smiled a little. That's when she suddenly looked right at me and said, "Since you missed the beginning of class, why don't you explain what I just said about the symbolism of light and darkness in this scene?" I froze. My mouth opened, but no words came out. She was testing me. I hadn't heard a single word since walking in. "Well?" she asked. "You said your bus broke down, so surely you didn't miss too much, right?" The whole class went silent. 20 pairs of eyes turned toward me again. I tried to remember anything that sounded like a smart answer. So I took a deep breath and said, I think the light represents hope, and darkness represents not hope. The class burst into laughter. Even Emma nearly fell off her chair trying not to laugh. Mrs. Brown didn't say anything. She just nodded slightly and said, "I see. An interesting interpretation." That calm tone of hers was worse than yelling. It meant she knew exactly what was going on and was waiting for me to dig my own grave deeper. I tried to laugh it off, but inside, I was panicking again. What if she really hadn't forgotten? What if this was her way of slowly setting a trap? When the bell finally rang, I thought I was free. I started packing my bag faster than I ever had before. But just as I was about to leave, her voice echoed through the room. "Stay for a moment, please." I turned around. The classroom was empty now. Mrs. Brown was sitting at her desk, quietly writing something. Without looking up, she said, "You and I need to have a little chat about that bus of yours." My heart dropped into my stomach. And that's when I realized the real test was only just beginning. I stood there by the door, pretending to organize my books, secretly hoping she'd forget I even existed. But Mrs. Brown was not the kind of person who forgot. She finally looked up, her pen still in hand, and said in a calm but firm voice, "So, tell me again, what exactly happened to your bus this morning?" My mind went blank, completely empty. I could almost hear the clock ticking behind me. I had two choices: tell the truth and face the consequences, or double down and make the lie even bigger. Unfortunately, I chose the second option. "Well," I began, forcing a nervous smile. "It wasn't the whole bus that broke down. It was just, one of the tires. Yeah, the tire burst." She raised an eyebrow. "A tire burst?" "Yes," I said, nodding confidently, though inside I was falling apart. "The driver had to stop and fix it. That's why we were late." Mrs. Brown put down her pen slowly and leaned back in her chair. "That's interesting," she said, "because my nephew drives the same route every morning. I could ask him if he saw anything unusual." My heart skipped a beat. What were the odds? Her nephew? The same route? I tried to stay calm. "Oh, maybe he didn't notice. It was early and, foggy." She looked at me for a long moment. Too long. Then she smiled faintly and said, "Foggy in August?" I knew I was doomed. My brain was scrambling for any possible way to escape this. "Well, maybe not fog," I said quickly. "Maybe just dust from the road?" Her silence was worse than anger. She didn't even argue. Just let me keep talking, digging myself deeper into the hole. I could feel my face turning red. Finally, she said, "The truth has a funny way of revealing itself, but I'll give you a chance to think about your story. I expect the real version by tomorrow morning." That should have been the end of it. But no, I couldn't leave it there. On my way home, I convinced myself I could make the lie more believable. So, I started telling people on the bus, "Hey, did you guys hear what happened this morning? Our bus tire almost exploded." By the time I reached home, half the class had heard about my imaginary bus disaster. Some even asked, "Really? Which tire was it?" And of course, I had to invent more details. Front left one, big hole, huge noise, the driver was panicking. It was like watching a snowball roll down a hill. Small at first, but growing faster and faster until it became impossible to stop. And the worst part? The next morning, Mrs. Brown didn't even look angry. She just smiled when she saw me walk in. That smile was terrifying, because deep down, I knew she was planning something. Something that would make me regret every single word I had said. The next morning, I walked into class with a smile that was far more confident than I actually felt. I had even rehearsed my story again in front of the mirror, just in case Mrs. Brown asked any follow-up questions. The lie had become so detailed that even I almost believed it. Everything seemed normal at first. She greeted everyone, wrote the day's topic on the board, and began talking about persuasive writing. Ironically, I was becoming an expert at that without realizing it. But then she said something that made my stomach twist. "Today," she announced, "we're going to talk about truth, lies, and the consequences of our words." My heart stopped. No, it couldn't be. Surely she wasn't talking about me. But then her eyes found mine, calmly, deliberately, and I knew she definitely was. She walked between the rows of desks as she spoke. Sometimes people lie to protect themselves. Sometimes they lie to impress others. But the problem with lies, she said, stopping right next to me, is that they always need more lies to survive. The entire room went silent. I couldn't move. My throat was dry. Then, as if it wasn't bad enough, she said, "Let's do a little exercise. Everyone will share one moment when they lied, and what happened next." The class murmured in surprise. My friends looked around, giggling nervously. One by one, students began sharing funny little stories, lying to their parents about homework, lying to friends about birthdays. Laughter filled the room. Then it was my turn. Mrs. Brown looked at me expectantly. "How about you?" she asked. "You must have an interesting story." For a moment, I considered confessing everything. My mind screamed at me to just tell the truth. But pride, that ridiculous pride, stopped me. So instead, I forced a laugh and said, "I once lied to a teacher about being late because my bus broke down." The class laughed again. Everyone thought it was a joke. But Mrs. Brown didn't laugh. She just tilted her head slightly and said, "That sounds oddly familiar." The laughter died instantly. My face burned with embarrassment. Then she said calmly, "See me after class." When the bell finally rang, I stayed behind. My legs felt heavy as I walked to her desk. She closed her notebook and looked straight at me. "You could have told me the truth yesterday," she said softly. "I wasn't angry about you being late. But now you've built a whole story around a lie." I didn't say anything. My voice wouldn't come out. She continued, "Do you know what disappoints me the most? It's not that you lied. It's that you thought you had to." Those words hit me harder than any punishment could. I finally whispered, "I'm sorry. I just didn't want you to think I was careless." Her expression softened. "Careless is human," she said. "Dishonest is a choice." There was a long silence. Then she handed me a small note and said, "Read this before tomorrow's class. It's from my favorite author." I nodded quietly and left the room, my chest heavy with guilt. On the way home, I unfolded the note. It read, "A lie may take care of the present, but it has no future." That night I didn't sleep much, because for the first time I understood exactly what that meant. The next morning, I arrived at school early, much earlier than usual. The air felt different. I wasn't rushing. I wasn't making excuses. I was just walking quietly, thinking about that sentence over and over. Asterisk, "A lie may take care of the present, but it has no future." Asterisk. Mrs. Brown was already in the classroom, organizing her notes. When she saw me at the door, she didn't say anything right away. She just gave me a small, knowing smile and continued writing on the board. After a moment, I walked up to her desk and placed a folded piece of paper in front of her. "I wrote something," I said quietly. She looked at me curiously, then nodded for me to go on. I unfolded the paper and began reading aloud. My voice trembled a little, but I didn't stop. "Yesterday I told a lie, not because I wanted to hurt anyone, but because I wanted to look better, smarter, more responsible, more perfect. But what I learned is that a lie doesn't make you look better. It just makes you look scared of the truth. And I don't want to be scared anymore." The classroom was empty except for the two of us. My words echoed softly in the room. When I finished, I looked up. Mrs. Brown was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's one of the most honest things I've heard in a long time." I smiled weakly. "So, am I in trouble?" She shook her head. "No, but you have a new assignment. From now on, every time you're late, you'll write a paragraph explaining why. The truth, not a story." I laughed nervously. "Even if it's something boring like, I overslept?" "Especially if it's something boring," she said with a grin. "The truth is often boring, but it's always real." That made me laugh too. For the first time, the tension between us disappeared. I realized she hadn't wanted to punish me. She wanted to teach me something I would remember long after high school. As I left the classroom that day, I felt lighter. It wasn't just about telling the truth anymore. It was about being honest with myself. And somehow that felt powerful. I didn't know it then, but that little experience with Mrs. Brown would shape how I handled honesty for the rest of my life. Years later, I still remember that morning in Mrs. Brown's classroom as clearly as if it happened yesterday. The nervous laughter, the burning embarrassment, the quiet lesson hidden behind her calm voice. All of it stayed with me. At the time, it felt like a disaster. I thought one small lie had ruined everything. But now, looking back, I realize it did the opposite. That single mistake opened my eyes to something far more valuable than grades or reputation. It taught me how fragile trust is, and how easily it can be broken with just a few careless words. Honesty, I've learned, isn't always comfortable. It doesn't make you look perfect, and sometimes it makes you face things you'd rather avoid. But it also brings peace. When you're honest with others and with yourself, you don't have to remember stories or hide behind excuses. You just live freely. Every time I find myself tempted to twist the truth, I think of Mrs. Brown's quiet smile, her patience, and that note she gave me. "A lie may take care of the present, but it has no future." Those words have followed me through jobs, friendships, even relationships. And funny enough, they've also made me a better storyteller, because the best stories, I've realized, are the ones that come from truth. So yes, I shouldn't have lied to my teacher. But maybe that one mistake was exactly what I needed to understand who I really was, and who I wanted to become. And that was my story, the day a simple lie turned into one of the most important lessons of my life. Sometimes the truth hurts, but it always helps us grow. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to my channel, Daily English Academy, for more real-life English stories that help you learn and feel at the same time. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever told a little lie that got completely out of control? I'd love to hear your story.